So, welcome to the modern age of comics. You've made it. Again, it's the modern age, even though we are past that now into the steel age. It's very vain to name something the modern thing. But that's where we're at. It's the modern age of comics, which keeps us a little bit toward the beginning of the 80s. I'm going to keep us there for a second. That's the tail end of the Bronze Age. But then the modern age really kicks off after this one big event that I'm going to talk to you about. So, we're going to recap the Bronze Age. You heard what I was talking about there. It's a lot of new rules by getting rid of the old rules. The Comics Code has changed some of their restrictions, so now we're getting a bit more real stories, a bit more adult. Crime waves are a big thing. We're going to get to Ronald Reagan gets elected, so that's important. Obviously, think of music history. Punk rock is going strong. Rock and roll's happening. Madonna's about to show up. Michael Jackson's about to hit the scene. This all happens in the modern age in the middle of the 80s. So that's a big, big deal that's going to really change a lot of culture. And that goes to that idea that in 1981 MTV was launched and the MTV generation and all of that. It's a big deal. That teenagers and youth culture was really being pushed and marketed to. All right. And one of the things that keeps these comic books alive when these sales wane and when generations are in between or in flux, like I always say, is animation is a thing. And by now we've had some television shows. We've had The Incredible Hulk, Wonder Woman, as we talked about. We've had some Hanna-Barbera cartoons. We've had some terrible Spider-Man cartoons that are actually kind of cool and now used as memes. We've had, you get into the 80s, the cartoons get a little better. And then by the mid 80s, they get a lot better, but as far as superheroes are concerned, not quite there yet, except for maybe some Hanna-Barbera. Scooby-Doo meets Batman, and that is still Adam West Batman doing the voice of that Batman. So that's going to change in the modern age where Batman gets redefined. And that's a big part of it. And a lot of that is because of media. I'm going to save the media for the last video here. And this week's videos are going to be a bit different. I'm going to try and be a little more speedy because I don't need to give you a synopsis of Watchmen because there are great ones out there done by geniuses. So that's going to be something that you're going to have to watch. And I might make you read Watchmen, or I might ask you to watch the Watchmen motion comic. I just watched the first chapter to see if it's good. And it's like, you know what? It's actually pretty damn good. It's a motion comic. They animated the comic. It's very flash animation, very like moving puppetry parts, flat paper moving. But they did a great job. It's acted out by it's one narrator. So he's doing the female voices too. Some people in the comment section didn't quite get that because it's just like an audiobook, but they did move the whole comic along. Some people in the comments liked it better than the Watchmen movie. So I'm deciding on what to do. I'll decide what to do with that, whether it's read the Watchmen or watch that motion comic. It's a total of 6 hours of watching a thing. So that's why I'm like, Reading the book, though, is 12 comics, and even that, a comic on average should take you 20 minutes it's like a good solid guess. So it's a little less than 6 hours, but still pretty lengthy as far as the Watchmen's concerned. So I'm going to make a decision about that. Dark Knight Returns, I'll find a video about that. That's another epic, very important thing that happens right here in the beginning of the modern age, right? In the 80s, 86, 87, around then is when that's going on, when you've got Batman being reinvented in comics, darker, to get rid of some of that Adam West vibe that's still going around. And then that'll continue on later on as we get into the impact of the Batman movie. But first, I want to still keep us late 70s, early 80s for a second and talk about the Superman movie real quick, just to touch on it. And then I'm going to do a video all about all the movies and the films. So Superman, the movie just come out. It's a film. It's Marlon Brando's in it. Gene Hackman's a big deal. That had come out in 1979. You'll Believe a Man Can Fly. Christopher Reeve embodies everything that is Superman. It's where you get that origin of Superman and the way you saw it. He's got superpowers his whole life. He's picking up tractors as a little baby. And the importance of that film. I'll get to it later, but we're coming out of that. So media and that movie affects the comics. Oh, the comics were waning. And then that, of course, gets some interest back, right? So now comics are really being propped up by some of this media that's coming out that always kind of gets younger people involved a little quicker. The Superman movie happens, and we've got that origin of Superman that has been the origin of Superman forever, and it's been that in the comics, but the comics are just getting a little old-fashioned because these heroes now seem a little out of place. They're a little too, cookie cutter and pure. I just read the the Spider-Man Superman crossover I was telling you about in 1975, and it is adorable, but it's so interesting. Like, and Superman's superpowers of having just any superpower. He crushes a computer, and Spider-Man's like, "Oh, we needed that." He's like, "Oh, don't worry, Spider-Man. My super photographic memory will allow me to super put this back together super quick." Like, ridiculous, you know? So comics were still kind of being written and looked a little old-fashioned. And we're headed toward an event where they're going to specifically age them by getting rid of continuity. They're going to leave some of their old continuity behind because they're trapped in it. The concept of Batman, it's just an adventure, right? It's just, I'm on an adventure. This is just a story, right? I'm just like Sherlock Holmes. What are the odds that Sherlock Holmes catches so many crazy villains, right? It's because there's stories in his life. James Bond, oh, I get James, I'll be 100 by now. It's just stories, and a new James Bond plays James Bond, but he's still James Bond. That's the same thing, except comics get kind of stuck. It's like, oh, the Joker's escaped 100 times. What's wrong with you, Batman? Oh, this has happened, and people get stuck in it. So now what they started to do is make continuity count by having a big event and saying, all right, that's the way it was. This is the way it is now. Going forward from this point, it is now this history. And we're going to start our comics at number 1 and retell it to this brand new generation of the 80s that are dying for it and ready to just really be marketed to. The consumer age really blows up in the 80s, and it's all about licensing, superheroes, and all of that. So all of that is really heading toward this event called The Crisis of Infinite Earths. Okay, and that is what it is. You see how big that is? That's a thick book. This is like 12 issues. Right? Worlds lived, worlds died, and the DC universe was never the same. So remember how I talked to you about there's Hoppy, Shazam, the bunny. Oh, well, how do we get that going? Oh, he's on Earth 889, where all the anthropomorphic animals live. Oh, what about this Flash? Oh, he's on Earth 1, and then this is Earth Prime, and then that's Earth 62667 Alpha. That's the Earth where... I'll tell you what, there's Crossover Earth. Crossover Earth was like Earth 6, that's the one where Spider-Man and Superman, they all live in the same world. That's how they explained that later. And they did. They explained it in like 2005. Oh, that's Crossover World. So that's what it is. It's infinite Earths. There's all these Earths, all these what ifs. And some of them we've seen, and some of them we've not, where they'll just make up some new ones. This is a world where Batman was Swamp Thing. This is a world where this... character that you know died, and Robin became Batman, and and he's been Batman forever. So that's some of the ideas. So some of these stories that we read, oh, turns out that was on a different Earth. Or how can Superman be fighting this villain in the comics, but now I'm reading this comic and he's on a date with Lois Lane doing this? I'm confused. These comics are on sale at the same time. Oh, that's just a different time. That might even be different Superman, a different planet. Don't even worry about that, so that people can just enjoy their comics. Now it was too bogged by all of this stuff. And it's happening again. Except now instead of a bunch of Earths, it's a bunch of universes. It's the multiverse. It's the answer to everything now, right? All of your pop culture is becoming multiversed and mashed up. And I'll talk to you about that later. Because it's an exponential version of what this was. So this is the first time we're going to say everything that you know is done. And that's a big thing. They erase that he's Superboy. Okay, so Superboy, all the Superboy comics, that's not this Superman anymore. When Superman comes back after the crisis, his parents are alive. And he didn't have his superpowers. This way he is Clark Kent. He grows up, and about the time he's a teenager, he starts to develop the powers. And that's what happens. And then goes off to the Daily Planet to go to the big city. And his parents are still around. Right? So now they're changing it again and again. The new movie had his dad die in a tornado, and now they're at not just we're 3 or 4 revamps now later, all these years later. Now they're doing Rebirth, and they just made a brand new Superman cartoon that's a brand new origin, and I hate it. And it's a mashup of all these origins, right? It's just, they're so stuck in their history. And that's why in one of the very first videos I talked to you about, I'm like, well, that's why one of my favorite books is Marvel Adventures. It's the kids' comic. It's not about murders, and there's no rape, and there's no horrors going on. It's, oh, the Vulture robbed a bank, and Spider-Man's going to chase after him and be really funny in this amazing art. I'm going to sit and read this. That's what I feel like reading today, you know? Because some of the stuff gets really heavy. This is really heavy because look at this cover. What's he doing there? That is the death of Supergirl. So Supergirl ends up dying. There's no more Supergirl, right? And that's his cousin. He's the last Kryptonian, and now one of the only family he knows is dead. That's one of the sacrifices. The Flash. The Flash has to run through the Speed Force and run through infinity until he's nothingness, right? And look at this cover. This is the glorious Alex Ross. Alex Ross is fantastic, right? Don't be fooled. This was not the art available at the time. This is for this trade paperback. Alex Ross I'll talk to you more about in the 90s. But look at this. This features so many characters. It's absurd. It's absurd. Let me just read you the back. In 1985, DC Comics dramatically altered comics' original universe with Crisis on Infinite Earths, a 12-issue series that rocked the comics community, tragically dooming some of DC's most beloved characters and drastically altering others. An unforgettable and defining event in comics history, Crisis was arguably the first company-wide crossover to make good on its promise of lasting change. Right? Marv Wolfman wrote it, and George Perez, the very, very good George Perez, inks by Dick Giordano. A lot of you picked him to work on your comics. It's great. Jerry Ordway, Mike DiCarlo. Find alternate worlds that once were a hallmark of the DC universe under siege by a mysterious force powerful enough to wipe out the lives of billions. So that's what it is that some being is bigger than all the Earths. Everything's scale. So he sees all the Earths and he's starting to just take some of the Earths. And then the heroes realize what's going on. A character from another Superman from another universe, another character goes, you have to help us stop this thing. What thing? This thing that's destroying not the universe, all universes. All these universes? Yes, there's a multiverse. There's all these Earths. Oh my goodness. So it all happens at the end of it, boom, all squished into one new reality. No multiple Earths. Now here's our new reality. Up until it's like, oh, well, Earth 1's still there. Okay, there's Earth 2. And Earth 2. And there's just a couple now. And it's not thousands and thousands. It's only... So that's what happens as things go on. It's a phenomenal story. Look, you can see this is old man Superman. Always old-timey, right? Because that is the Superman that's been around since the 40s. And then we get, after 1986, our new Superman. So one day he zips to that universe. Old man Superman shows up in Identity Crisis in the 2000s to talk about, oh, you have no idea, this thing that you thought we did back in the day, we didn't. And I'm here to tell you that it's going to happen again. Come again and save us again. And that's DC. They're addicted to crisis. It's always a crisis. That's the theme of it. It's Crisis on Infinite Earths, Identity Crisis, Crisis of, what was the other one? They use Crisis. That's their gimmick. And they know it. Even the characters will be like, is it a crisis? Like, Marvel's response to this at the same time is great. Okay? It's the big one, true belief is, the fate of the entire Marvel Universe hangs in the balance, as all of Earth's greatest superheroes face their deadliest foes on the mysterious planet known as Battle World. So someone takes, a bigger alien takes all the superheroes to Battle World, making them all fight and do whatever, and whoever wins what is like, oh, you get to survive and you don't, right? It's the Secret Wars. So this is their big crossover. The first mega crossover of its kind, Secret Wars still stands as a milestone in the comic book industry. Collecting this 12-issue limited series, written by Jim Shooter and illustrated by Mike Zeck and Bob Layton. This is where famously Spider-Man gets the black costume. Okay, and that goes on. That costume becomes sentient, we find out, and then it tries to take over Spider-Man. Spider-Man rejects it, and it goes and finds another person in town that Spider-Man supposedly ruined his life, one Eddie Brock, and it bonds with him, and Venom is born years and years later. So fascinating. So here's the thing about this book. It is... Take a look at this art, right? Look at this art. It's still, this is the 80s, so this is on par with when this art was coming out there in DC. It looks like the 60s still. This was still the model of Marvel Comics, where they really hadn't changed much of the art style in years. Like it was a format, like you're following a character guide, you know? Like the Thing looks pretty fun there again. Like he's kind of fun there, but still very old-fashioned. Very old-fashioned, right? You can see how big art is going to jump once we get to 1990 and 92 with Image and with the McFarlane era of things. It's, you know, it's just something to behold how much it all advanced. Look at this. Look at Wolverine. This is even brown suit Wolverine, right? Because they didn't want him to be as corny in the yellow. That's what they started thinking. Look at that. Look at that, right? It's adorable. You know, the anatomy's all still there. The structure's all obviously there. How to Draw the Marvel Way is still one of the greatest illustration books of all time, especially for the genre. You know, you can see there's that wouldn't exist without Kirby inventing that sort of thing years ago, right? It doesn't have the crackle, but it's certainly got the oomph. Oh, look at Doom. Oh, I've never seen Doom in such dire trouble. So that's what is going on. These events are such a big deal that even they're merchandisable. That this was the first set of action figures was the Secret Wars action figures. So action figures based on a comic event. That's a big deal. That's a big deal because usually it is movies, it's television. That's what moves merchandise. That's what moves He-Man. All that gets invented where those cartoons, He-Man, G.I. Joe, She-Ra, even the Ghostbusters when they get adapted for kids. Everything gets adapted for kids. Even R-rated movies get adapted for kids. Because bye, Toys R Us is booming. Toy stores exist. The comic book store as its own shop is just growing, right? The whole identity of that culture and that world of the comic book store, not just the racks. You now have definitive stores growing exponentially, and that'll continue into the 90s, and then the bubble bursts, right? But we're still in the 80s here, and this just sets the precedent. So now you can see comics, we're serious, we just grew up. This term, pre-crisis and post-crisis, it's like AD and BC, right? That's pretty important. Because who are they talking about with BC? Pretty important guy, right? So now what's DC talking about? Some pretty important guys, right? So that's what it is that you've got all these superheroes now go forward in a different way, and they're trying to just get a new generation, and it works 100%. It absolutely does. Granted, things, like I say now, this is 85, so we're that many years, 95, 2005, 15, we're 35 years removed from this event. And they still reference this moment and still are impacted by this moment and the other crisis that they've had since then and the other crossovers they've had since then. 0 Hour is a crossover. The Night's End is a crossover. There's all the Superman, Death of Superman becomes crossover. Marvel starts doing the X-Men crossovers. All these crossovers are a problem because the artists start to feel really like, come on, I'm trying to craft something. And you're just like, shoehorn this in, make this connect to this. This has, whatever you're doing, stop because this has to happen, right? And media also starts to dictate what the rules are for comics. And you've all always seen that, okay? Because the movie makes billions of dollars and then a bunch of people want to go read the comics. So the comics should match the movie. Well, we better make these changes, better do this, better do that. Spider-Man's married? What do you mean? Let's get rid of that, right? So that's another great thing that happens during this time. Spider-Man gets married! Da, 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 da.
In trying to make our characters real, we decided let's marry Spider-Man. I mean, Peter Parker had been dating Mary Jane for years. He was in love with her. Well, what's the next logical development?
The nuptials, held in Shea Stadium in New York and officiated by Stan Lee, earned national press. The New York Times reported the wedding in its style section. The paper quoted Mary Jane as saying that the groom was nervous. He's been pacing the ceiling for weeks.
I pronounce you Spider-Man and wife. You may take the bride. Excelsior!
If you had been reading Spider-Man...
I was quiet weddings. Oh my God.
15 years.
They grow Spider-Man up just by doing that. So in the 70s, he's in college. And then as we get into the 80s, I believe he graduates college and he gets married. And they have a big fun event at Shea Stadium. I cried when I saw the footage the other day because I always cry at weddings. That there's Stan Lee. It's in the newspapers. You got Spider-Man. There's Captain America, the Hulk. All adorably cheesy. Mary Jane, this woman that Spider-Man's marrying at Shea Stadium. The place is packed for a baseball game most likely. And then he does, and Stan Lee's the minister and he says, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Excelsior! As a creator, I couldn't imagine having your fictional characters become so real to people that you get to do this for real. We announced Spider-Man's going to be married in the comic. Boom, the newspaper gets it. They have a real wedding. It's amazing, right? And to be able to shout your catchphrase as your imagined creations there for everyone, it's so fantastic, right? That your character has grown up and you're at his wedding. What is that? So something to behold. And that was the thing about comics kind of growing up. All right, so comics grew up in the 80s. The violence is up. Wolverine starts to take more of the main stage and becoming kind of known for who he is, right? And becoming really popular. The anti-everything Wolverine, the violence, and just cool. He's just cool as hell, right? So that's going on in the 80s. We've got, and I'm just going to look ahead because this might be it. I wanted to do an 80s video basically focused on the 90s. And then I'm going to talk about more of the media at the end to wrap it up, all those movies that kind of happened from 1979, some of those TV shows, and then the cartoons and some of the other movies all the way basically till about the Avengers, I think is when we can just be like, that's enough of that. So Spidey gets married at Shea Stadium. The Dark Knight involves Batman. Where I'll find you a video on that. I'll find you a thing on the Watchmen. Those are probably going to be your discussion questions. I really might make the Watchmen a bigger project. If you read one comic in your life, it's the Watchmen. It's still, okay? And I don't want you to go watch this video that's an analysis of it because it gives away the ending of one of the greatest stories ever told, all right? So you should really read it, and I'm going to just figure out a way to do it so everybody has enough time to read that or watch the videos and then create something or write something about that makes sense. All right, so I'll find you a video about The Dark Knight Returns. Do I even have to? Here's what happens in The Dark Knight Returns. So that is Frank Miller. Frank Miller I brought up, very gritty, all right, very gritty artist. I'll tell you what, I have it, right? Don't I even have it in the other room? I'll edit this. So let's talk about The Dark Knight Returns quick, because I'm not going to go find a whole other video on this. It's very good, it's very important, but at the same time, things age out as well. So this is still very 80s. Watchmen has a little bit of that, but there's always, again, my favorite word, strife, right? There's always political problems. There's always going to be issues of race, issues of discrimination, issues of rich over the poor, it seems. And in 1986, it's still the same thing. Some of what was going on in the UK was a white power uprising, was fascism, was showing its signs. And Reagan is, to many, the worst in a lot of respects. And it's the religious right starts to take over. And we talked about that the other day. I talked about religion in a way that, because it's not comfortable to talk about all these topics. But the idea of like a zealot, the idea of extremism, all right? And that is the censorship problem. That is the no rights for LGBTQ community because no, they're the devil. They're going to hell. We have to cast them out. That's bad. Okay, 100%. And that's still the problem of religion and that movement if they just hang their hat on that belief, because that's some of the problem. It really is. Other than that, yes, religion could be a great, great thing. So the thing about it is that those issues are really going on in America and the UK. Some of what we're seeing now, where there's a rising up of fascism, white power is going on. You think that it'll never come back. It does. It's there, and it bubbles to the surface. So that's a bit of what's going on. There is the AIDS crisis is going on now in the 80s. We are fighting for gay rights now the way that they were fighting for, and women are still fighting for their rights aplenty, and so are people of color. But a lot of attention has now gone to the gay community because there's an AIDS crisis, okay? Gay cancer used to be horribly called, like as a slur. They used to think only gay people could get this. But this is because of the loose living of the 70s and some of that nasty stuff, especially, again, New York. There's some sleazy activities going on and people were pretty loose and freewheeling. Safe sex, again, not really a big issue yet. No one realizes that that's important and doing that. And even today, I bring this up as an example today. I remember people fought seatbelts, right? This is about the time Supergirl made a seatbelt comic that's terrible. I just saw in a funny video. Because people didn't want to wear seatbelts, and now seatbelts are the law, right? Are you mad? Is that your rights? They're discriminating against me because I refuse to wear a seatbelt. How dare they? Helmets, right? Oh, what about masks? It's the same thing. People have done the same thing over seatbelts, over helmets, and condoms, obviously. We still live in a world where people do not understand safe sex. It's not taught correctly, and it's an issue, right? So the whole thing about that is that is a big issue on why that becomes a big spreading problem, is they have to figure out how to link it first, and everybody's having unprotected sex. So that really just sweeps the nation and is horrible to see. Horrible. And the war on drugs begins as well, which is a sham. And that's not me saying that. It's the war on drugs was a big waste of money historically. All right. It did not work. The Star Wars program by Ronald Reagan did not work and cost lots of money. Okay. These are some of the things. And again, I say them, look them up. All right. If you don't know what that means, Star Wars, what do you mean? Ronald Reagan had a Star Wars program. We'll look up what that was. National defense things, right? That was a big issue. So those are just some of the things going on in the 80s, all right, around this time. And this reflects some of that, as does The Watchmen. So The Dark Knight Returns is the fact that the Batman's kind of done. He's retired. He's 50-something years old. He's grizzled. You know, he caught a lot of those famous criminals, but that's kind of done. But now a new wave of crime, a new real problem rises up. So he comes out of retirement. and he's just mean, and he's bigger, right? He's not killing people, but he's shooting them. I think of rubber bullets, right? That's the famous thing. He's rubber bullets. So he's doing that where he's still out there, but he's out there with a vengeance, right? And he's fighting these. Oh, there it is, right there. All right. And he's fighting these mutoids, the mutants, right? They're different type of mutants, not like X-Men mutants. And there he is in the Batmobile, and he's shooting this crowd of these monsters. He famously is. Oh, look at that! Look at that! The art's fantastic, and this is the first time anyone's seen the Batman anything like this, right? Where everyone again imagines him as Adam West still. Biff Bam Pow. That happens to this day to a degree. Again, not me, not you. All right, but still, people over me is like, oh, there's a new Batman movie. I remember Batman, and they have no concept of, oh, it's already been the Christopher Nolan thing, and like, oh, the Joker has his own film by this other, like, they're like, yeah, the Joker? What do you mean? From the Adam West Batman? No. So that is the thing. It really bothered a lot of people what happened. But then everyone does grow because they see the world grows out of it. This was this thing where when the world didn't have all the media that it wanted, people went away, and child actors couldn't deal with it, and people used to be washed up. Adam West couldn't get work because, like, you're Batman. He wanted to work. Nope. Captain Kirk, William Shatner, was having a tough time getting certain gigs at certain points. He says a bunch of negative things about Star Trek that really scarred the fan base at the time. I think it's a Saturday Night Live skit. Leonard Nimoy writes a book that's like, I am not Spock. Like, because the fandom had become, in a way, too much, but also it's hard when you're typecast and you want to evolve and you don't want to be like, I'm not Spock. That was 20 years ago. It was just a thing I did for 3-4 years. Nope. And then those Star Trek movies start coming out in 1979 because of Star Wars. So then he's Spock again. So this whole thing is just fantastic. It really is such a fascinating, gritty, violent, different take. He's got a young Robin that's, another orphan, whatever. It's a girl. She's a slingshot, right? She just saved his life because he almost died, but she saved him. They turn on the bat signal again for the first time. Here's the famous fight in the mud. He just fights this thing in the mud, just beats the head of this gang. It's this famous fight of him in the mud, and he says, this isn't a fight. It's a hospital, right? There it is. I got it right here. You don't get it. He says, you don't get it, boy. This isn't a mud hole. It's an operating table. And I'm the surgeon. And then he probably does drown him in the mud, and it's just ridiculous. And then people react. It's all the people reaction to the media. The media plays a big role in this, and the Watchmen. You look at how they talk about media. Big role it plays. So it's something to think about because media really does. It's been affecting us all. It affects everything. But they really show you the dystopic problem with media, and they were right because it's only gotten worse. They were predicting a lot of, and by they, I mean Frank Miller, as well as, Lynn Varley did the art, okay? It is called probably the finest piece of comic art ever to be published in a popular edition, Stephen King. So pretty high praise, all right? And again, this redefines the character. And I'll just touch on it here, and then we get the Michael Keaton Batman. We would not have Michael Keaton Batman without The Dark Knight Returns 4 years earlier, okay? Because it was still Batman. And a lot of people had grown up and they're like, this is not what Batman should be. Even when my dad saw Adam West Batman, he was like, what is this? He watched one episode. He was too old for it already. And not like my dad's any type of comics fan, but he just remembers when it showed up. And he was like, Batman's supposed to be serious. So, and now he's the most serious thing on earth, isn't he? My goodness, of all the superheroes. Sad Batman. So that's a big chunk of the 80s. It really, really is. Again, a lot of properties just kind of keep growing as they do, and the big heavy hitters that you all know today are still developing right then, and obviously just in smaller ways. Again, X-Men, Spider-Man, big things. In the comics, obviously they have their ups and downs, but you can see where they were still at with the art in the 80s. And no, it's not until the 90s that they really evolve some of it. So I'll leave it at that. Because these are the real high points of the decade of the 80s as we go from a little bit of the tail end of bronze into that pre-crisis, post-crisis, Boom, that's the difference. That's the line in the sand. This comes out right then. Watchmen comes out right then. I don't have my copy of Watchmen because I think someone borrowed it, and that's where copies of Watchmen go. Because it's the one book you want everyone to read, so someone borrows it when they see it on your shelf, and then you never see it again. You got to buy a new copy of Watchmen. So, and this will probably be like my 4th copy of Watchmen, if not more. So I'm going to decide on what to do with that. You'll see it pop up as an assignment or not. Be prepared. If you've already read The Watchmen, you're going to reread The Watchmen because, again, it's about subtext and it's about looking at it. If you've already read it, then just watch the animated movie because it's pretty good. Again, it's a motion comic. It's just pretty interesting. So I'll talk about that and figure that out later. Till then, it's the 80s. It's the best. Yeah, enjoy finishing those Silver Age comics and making that card. Again, projects are going to overlap a bit. I am very aware of these deadlines. I'm always going to try and keep you well-paced. Right now, that midterm's coming up. If you notice, that's worth 10 points. Usually these things are 4 points, so that's worth a little bit of double and a half, right? So make sure that that's a good thing. And remember, that's almost completely imagination, right? You have to reference some historical moments, but that paper is just how you're evolving your character for 40 years. Don't even go past 1980, right? For 40 years, 1940 to 1980. You don't even have to get into the 80s yet because you can probably imagine what the next chunk's going to be. It's going to be another chunk of that paper is going to be 1980 till 2020. So that'll be in a couple weeks too. So you've got some writing ahead. That one's very imaginative, which is why I'm not as, it's worth a lot, but that's why it's easy, right? Look up some historic events that are going on that I've mentioned in these videos and just be creative about everything that happens to your character. Look at what can happen to a character. Make up a bunch of nonsense. Media that changes, all this stuff. And some of you did a good job by the Silver Age already, where the company got sold or something got bought and someone took it over. Very good, and I love it because that's what's really fun. So, all right, that's the end of this video. I hate long goodbyes. That's the end of this one. Look for the 90s one as well as the movie one as the modern age rolls on.